Hello. Welcome, everyone. We got just a couple of minutes here. We're gonna start right at 10 o'clock. Hopefully everyone can hear me. You are currently on mute, but you could type a response in the chat. Oh, I see a couple thumbs up. Good, that works too. All right. Excellent. How's everyone doing this morning? Hopefully awesome. It's kind of nice. Supposed to be a nice day here in Minnesota. I don't know if there's anyone that's outside of the greater Minnesota area here on our list, but if you are, welcome. The joy of online meetings, I guess. Ooh. All right. Just had a couple others join. We are right at 10 o'clock here, so I think maybe we'll get started. Guess if anyone else joins, then they can pick up wherever they join in. All right. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Michael Mabie, and I've been here at AdvancedTek for 12 years. Hold on one second. Sorry, I had to close my door. I wanted to make sure that the office didn't have to hear teacher voice. So as I was saying, I I've been here at AdvancedTek for 12 years. I've been running FDM systems since 2005. So doing the quick math, that's over 20 years. And I will say that every once in a while, the machines do still surprise me. So part of what we're going to talk about today is a couple things to kind of look out for, or a couple things that I do on a daily basis with a majority of my builds to try to make sure that I don't have to rebuild a part because I really dislike rebuilding parts. So a couple things we're going to talk about. You might recognize this. Get it in the camera just right. So this is a purge tower or a sacrificial tower. You can see that it's all goobered up. We'll talk about that. The other thing that I want to talk about is this. Here we've got a nice, beautiful extrusion profile that I built vertically, nice and clean. But on the other end of this 25, 30-inch part, very ripply and wonky. So not very desirable. And yes, I did have to rebuild that. Um, so taking a step back, this is our first of hopefully many Additive Essentials episodes or sessions. I don't know what we want to call them, but I want this to be valuable for you as the customer. So we're going to ask for your feedback. We're going to ask for topics that we can potentially cover for future sessions. Kind of bouncing around some ideas for next session being kind of a couple of overlooked or not often covered things within the Insight software. So if you don't know the Insight software, that would be a perfect thing to join in on. And then more importantly, it's not just saying, hey, I'm going to pick and choose Insight over GrabCAD Print, for example. It's using both of them in conjunction with one another. So using the strength of both. And that's ultimately what I'm kind of after with all of these sessions is just trying to understand what tools do we have available and what can we do to help make our builds turn out a little bit better. and hopefully achieve the not having to rebuild parts, because nobody likes to do that. All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. As I said, we have 3 topics that we're going to talk about with mitigating build risks. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And the first of those. Now, I understand that we're going to have a variety of customers that have a variety of machines, 450s, 900s, 370s, etc. So some of these things might not apply to you. If they do, then great. Or if they don't apply to you, I will likely cover something that will eventually apply to you. So first thing, as I mentioned before, was the sacrificial tower. So I always like to add in a sacrificial tower to the full height. The idea here is that after it does its purge, it's going to go ahead and model this sacrificial tower. And the idea is that if there is any debris that's left on that tip that doesn't quite get flicked off by the flicker, it's going to embed itself into that sacrificial tower. So that one that I showed at the very beginning of the meeting, that saved an entire build. That was a like 50, 60-hour job. And had I not had that sacrificial tower in there, that all would have ended up in my part, which would have required me to rebuild that part. If you have a 370 or a F3300, this is going to be on by default because it does not do a purge. It just simply models the sacrificial tower. But that's the reason I wanted to point it out. For certain materials, so let's say I'm going to build this in nylon 12 CF, you can see that this is going to default to the full height. Now, the difference between full height and last swap is the last layer that model and support are existing in the same layer. So looking at this model, our support actually is going to end right here. So if I didn't want to waste all this material and runtime, I could simply say last swap. The problem with that is I'm still extruding model, and the model is what I'm ultimately after. So I always like to go full height if I'm going to build a sacrificial tower at all. Because periodically, even though it's all model, it does still have to purge, and it does so on a time basis. And it's going to go ahead and still do its purge, still model on the tower, and then it's going to result in a nicer looking part with hopefully without any default or defects or embedded material. So I'm going to switch this back to ABS M30, 10 slice. And again, you'll notice, hey, it turns this off. So I always like to go ahead and turn that thing on. For those of you that primarily run Insight, if we have time, I can certainly take you through all of these different examples and show you an Insight. It all is very similar, but it's just going to be in a slightly different location. So now that I have my sacrificial tower added, what I'm going to do is talk about that first topic of wall stabilizers. So in looking at this part, I have a couple things by design, like this right here. Number one, this wall is not very tall. So do I have to worry about this? Probably not. I also notice that it has this kind of zigzag feature to it, which in its own is going to be relatively stable. So I'm not saying you should use a wall stabilizer on everything, but let's say you build a part and this feature doesn't turn out because of this radius right here. This could still potentially start to vibrate back and forth. And if you want to eliminate that, then I can add a wall stabilizer. So similar to your sacrificial tower, think of it as cheap insurance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a wall stabilizer over here, and I'm going to show you a couple of different methods. So wall stabilizer is this icon right here. I'm going to drag this to the height that I want my stabilizer to start at. And then I'm going to click on this contour. And GrabCAD Print's going to automatically put in this wall stabilizer. Now, this is kind of ridiculous. I'm not certainly going to build it like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of these points. So number one, I'm going to change contact points to 2. And I'm going to take this cursor and I'm going to put it right here. And then I'm going to grab this one and put it over here. So what you want is you want those 2 arrows to point towards one another. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to put in a wall stabilizer in between those 2 points. Now, again, you'll look at this based on the settings that I have with a depth of 2 inches. I don't need to extend out 2 inches because I'm only 4.5 inches tall. I can change this. So let's just change this to 1 inch. And see if that helps with this goofiness. And it did help, but it still just doesn't quite look right. So I could try moving my points, but what's happening is I have constant depth. So what that means is it's looking at this outer profile and it's essentially trying to do a complete offset of that and mimic that shape. So if I change this to a flat back, now all of a sudden you're going to see a much different result. And now this is going to add stability here to this feature, and it's going to extend over here. And I can change these points to wherever I would like them to be. And that's one of the nice things about GrabCAD Print with doing this generating preview is you can kind of tweak and dial it in to get it exactly the way that you want. Now, right now, you can see here that this extends all the way until it hits something. But because we're going to end up having support here, once we generate the supports, what it's going to do is this will extend until it hits supports. Another thing that I will point out, if I zoom in here real quick, is these are your contact points. So your contact points, in this case, are every 100,000th of an inch. I'm going to change that because I don't need to be that aggressive and contact that part that often. So I often like to do every 300 thousandths or every 30 layers if I'm building with 10 slice. But you can custom tune that or dial it in. Now, for these other values, contact gap, contact penetration, that has to do with how far away when it's not touching the part versus how much does it actually embed into the part. I find that I have really good luck with just leaving these 2 as their defaults. Now, if you start running wall stabilizers and you have some challenges or issues, then you can go ahead and contact me and we might be able to tweak these parameters a little bit to dial them in. So I now have that one there. And now I'm going to move up and kind of look at this next area. Now a curve, a big, huge curve is going to be relatively stable with the exception of this corner right out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add another wall stabilizer. Grab this, change the height. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm just going to use 2 contact points. Zoom in here, make it a little easier to select. Again, it's going to randomly throw in 2 points that I don't know what it's thinking sometimes. So I'm just going to go ahead and place these over here. Let it regenerate, and now I get something like this. Now you'll notice that this is kind of off of the build tray, But remember, as long as I have room to move the entire build over when I go to download that job, it's not going to be an issue. Um, and what I could always do is I could also change the depth. Now this is only like 9.5, 10 inches. So typically once I get above 8 inches, that's when I start to use wall stabilizers. 2 inches is a good number if you're going the full height of a 450 build envelope. So 16 inches tall, you could go 2 inches deep and that gives you enough stability. In this case, I'm going to go down to say 1.5 because I don't need to extend out that much. And another thing that I can do to kind of, let's just change this to where I'm changing my contact points so that I'm not touching that too often. And I'm going to have it set up something similar to this. So now I'll go ahead and add in my last wall stabilizer. I'm going to go all the way to the top. Again, it defaults, GrabCAD Print defaults to 4 contact points. I'm going to typically do 2. And if I do 2, what I can do is generally I'm okay with spanning up to about, all right, so now this is interesting. So what happened here is you'll notice that my arrows are pointing outwards. What I need to do is to flip-flop these because I want the arrows to point inward because that is where my wall stabilizer is going to build in between those. Now, GrabCAD Print is catching up. That's the reason for all of these error messages. So just go ahead and get rid of those. And again, if I want, I could go ahead and I could measure and get an idea. Okay, so 1 inch is right about there. Let's turn that off. We'll go back to our wall stabilizers. I'm going to continue to modify this one. So again, I'm going to change this to 0.3, 2 contact points, 2-inch depth, just because I don't always like to do the defaults. I'm going to say 1 3/4. And now I'm good to go. So now let's say that I go ahead and I build this part. I send it to the machine. Now my vertical walls all turn out absolutely beautiful. But based on how this part is positioned, if you look real closely, I have this relatively thick plate down here at the bottom. And it's got this chamfer or radius on the bottom of it, which means I've got support that builds up at least halfway on that. And I have seen on occasion, and it's typically the right-hand side of a machine, because our airflow typically goes left to right. So what happens is we get a little bit of a dead space or dead airflow right here, and it doesn't allow this to cool properly. So I have actually seen features like this that have actually curled up a little bit. So to prevent that, another tool that we have is anchor pins. And with an anchor pin, I just simply pick my anchor style. Now, a conical is only available if it's higher up, meaning it's not right against the base plate. So I'm going to select on this one. I'm going to click my surface. And now you're going to see what it's going to do is it's going to take and put in a little anchor column, but this is going to be bonded to the bottom of your part. So one of the things that I don't like about anchor pins is they can be kind of difficult to remove, but that's where you can play around with this diameter. So if you're at 100 thousandths, that's actually pretty small. And you can add multiples, and you would be further ahead to add multiple small points as opposed to just 1/4 inch, because it's going to be a lot easier to hit with a a chisel. Sometimes you can even just hit it with a hammer and it'll just break off. Otherwise, if you do any woodworking, they have flush trim saws that you could just lay right on that surface and you could saw that thing off. So we got a couple of different options there, but that is anchor pins combined with wall stabilizers, all within my one part. So if I wanted to finish processing this, oh, click the wrong button. On my anchors, create boundary curves. Object is outside of the volume. Let's move this stuff a little bit so that we can see what the final result looks like. And then we are going to open it up to questions and possible topics. I do not see any questions right now in the chat. Feel free to enter them in. Otherwise, what I can do is you can unmute yourself and you are welcome to ask any clarifying questions on applying wall stabilizers, anchor pins, or using a sacrificial tower, or possible future topics. Anyone? Maybe you're all sipping coffee. While I'm waiting on my model to slice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over and I'm going to show the same part in Insight. It looks like I do have one person typing a question at the moment. We'll get to that in a second. For those of you that are not familiar with Insight, this is another software that you can use to process parts for FDM only. So GrabCAD Print works for all of the Stratasys product lines, all of the different technologies. Insight is specific to FDM. And so this is the software I've been running since 2005. And at that time, I think right now we're on version 19 something. I think when I started, we were on version like 3 or 4, just to give you some idea. And it came on CDs. Just going to hop back here, slicing model. We do have a question here from Philip. Are there materials that are easier to work with or less risky? That is a great question. Typically, your lower temperature materials are going to be less risk because we don't have to worry about that significant temperature differential, warping or distorting. They also tend to be a lot more forgiving. So if you stick with the ABS and ASA, and then as soon as you jump into, say, polycarbonate, your temperature increases. Nylon can be a little bit of its own beast because, and we're getting off topic here, but there's a thing called build modes where we can actually change the temperature inside the build envelope to match our build geometry. If you use the wrong setting, you can actually have too much heat in the build chamber and your walls will distort or warp. And you can actually use a wall stabilizer to counteract that. If you build with Altem, as things cool, they might start to shrink or distort a little bit. And you can also use wall stabilizers to help kind of lock in that geometry so that when you pull that build and it cools, that you're able to have a nice accurate geometry once it's all done and cool. Jack mentioned a topic about printing nylon would be helpful. Absolutely, we could talk about some of the nuances with nylon. And I would also include the nylon CF12 material. All right. And we got a thumbs up on that one as well. So when you guys are saying nylon, are you talking regular nylon or nylon CF12? or the ABS CF10, not the ABS CF10, the carbon filled ABS or the nylon on the 370. So a little bit of both. When you use anchor pins, can you still reuse the tray or does the pin bond to the tray? Good question. It does bond to the tray. Certain materials are going to be very difficult to remove it. So if I take a look at this, now that my tool paths have all generated, this purple are my stabilizers and anchors, but that is model material. So that's going to model directly onto the build tray. Most materials are going to be okay. ABS, ASA, PCABS, those are all going to be fine and peel off the sheet fairly easily. Once we get into the polycarbonate and the nylons, those bond a little more significantly to the build tray, to the build sheet. So you have to be a little bit careful when you're pulling that off. Sharp corners will create a crack on that build tray. Unless you go ahead and you come in here and with a needle nose, if you kind of pinch this and kind of pinch that geometry right at the base, I've even gone in as far as taking a little side cutters and cutting the wall stabilizer just to make sure that I can reuse my build sheet. Now, obviously, in this case, I don't have a lot of room left on the build sheet, so I'm not going to worry as much about it. Same thing with the anchor pins. They are going to be model bonded directly to that tray. So depending on the material and how careful you are when you remove it, if you do a real quick, hey, let's just rip this thing off, chances are you're going to rip or tear that build sheet. So if you get underneath with a scraper or a chisel or something like that, that can certainly help so that you can reuse that build sheet or build tray. Any other questions? More coffee? Okay. All right. Well, since this is done, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hop back and I'm going to do the same thing, but in the Insight software. So if you have not used Insight, it is a very fun software. And I say fun because it's very powerful. There's a lot that you can do. So essentially, I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with that other part. I'm just showing where those features are. So if I go click under the support tab, I go to stabilize wall, and you can see that it's got certain defaults already set here. Now this goes by layer interval instead of distance. Instead of picking how many contact points, you pick a contact interval. So what the software is going to do is you are going to pick a point, pick another point, and the software is going to essentially estimate that distance, and it's going to divide it by this contact interval. So if you want more contact points along your sidewall, let's just do a quick example. So I select 1 point, I select 2 points. And because I have it set at 8 inches for the overall, for the contact interval, if I were to measure this right here, my diagonal is about 5 inches. So what it did is it actually said, hey, this is greater than 8 inches, so I need to have another contact point. But if I went ahead and I made this 4, now notice it doesn't automatically just regenerate. So I hit the red X, I'm going to try it again. And now you're going to see that I now have multiple contact points because my contact interval, approximately this distance, is what I'm entering in here. But I don't want to do that. I want to add one over here, and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to pick this point right here, and it's going to give me this error, and that's where I'm going to say, oh, yep, I need to do flat back. Now it's going to tell me that it extends outside of the build envelope, but I'm going to say okay, because I know that I can just take and shift that entire part over to the side. So now I look at all of my layers, looking at it from a top view. Let's go to this layer right here, and I'm going to add a stabilizer real quick over here. I'm going to uncheck that because I don't want to have a flat back on this one. Works best to look at it from a straight top view because otherwise it gets a little bit skewed and a little goofy. So there's that one. And then we go all the way to the top of the part. And I'm going to add one more over here, but I am going to make this one 2 inches. I know it's not the same as what I used before, but that's what I'm doing. Now, here, one little quick thing. So you'll notice that there's no sacrificial tower in here because that comes in, or I add that in when I open up Control Center. So Control Center is what interfaces to the machine. And when you download Insight off of the Stratasys website, it comes with Insight and Control Center, which maybe that's a topic that I can cover for next time. But what I wanted to point out is that if I have a wall stabilizer that goes all the way to the top of my part, it's always, meaning the machine, is always going to model the wall stabilizer first. So that can actually stand in or take place of my sacrificial tower. So keep that in mind, that if you do run wall stabilizers, run it all the way to the top, then you don't need to add an additional sacrificial tower. All right, we're right at 10:30. I actually went a minute over. I apologize. If you have any other questions, we'll leave the session open for a little bit. Add them to the chat. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to any of your contacts at AdvancedTek and get in touch with us, and we'll try to help answer any additional questions. All right. Well, thank you much. And you all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to joining you next month, which I think we are going to aim for January 13th at 10 a.m. So please join us. Look out for an email at that point, and we shall be in touch.